Ciphers of Time, Awakening the Legacy. Chapter 4. The Place. Manu stood by the hospital bed, his gaze fixed on Shantanu's pallid face. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor filled the room, each beep a stark reminder of the thread upon which his brother's life dangled. Manu's mind churned with the case of recent events. The planned family trip to an island near London, now a distant memory eclipsed by this grim hospital vigil. Manu whispered, "You have to fight through this. I need you to." But Shantanu offered no response, locked in his silent battle. A nurse entered quietly, offering a sympathetic glance before checking the monitors and making notes in her chart. Manu knew it was time to leave. He had made a promise, though it was tinged with doubt and desperation. Exiting the hospital, Manu's eyes narrowed against the harsh sunlight, his thoughts still ensnared by the sight of his brother's coma-bound form. He found the waiter, the self-proclaimed Shantanu in another body, waiting by a car, restless energy emanating from him. They shared a nod, devoid of any real connection, and started their journey toward the forest. Seeing Shantanu's situation, Manu could not help but wonder that perhaps he should have focused more on his brother's emotional state, rather than just providing for his financial needs while they were growing up. Maybe if he had spent more time with him and tried to understand why he acted out in such reckless ways, things could have been different. Manu's last day in India was filled with mixed emotions. He was excited to start a new chapter of his life in London, as he got a new job there. He also made all the arrangements for Shantanu to join him in London. The night before they were supposed to leave, Shantanu had thrown a lavish party for all his friends. Manu had initially hesitated to attend, knowing how reckless Shantanu could get when he drank. But he didn't want to disappoint his brother. As the party raged on, Manu tried to keep a close eye on Shantanu, knowing how easily things could get out of hand. But as the drinks flowed and the music blared, Shantanu's behavior became more erratic and unpredictable. Manu saw Shantanu getting into a heated argument with one of his friends. He quickly intervened, trying to calm both parties down before things escalated. But it was too late. The argument had already turned physical, and soon other friends got involved. Manu tried to pull Shantanu away from the chaos, but Shantanu's aggression had taken over. Shantanu was totally uncontrollable, hurling abuses and causing a scene. But suddenly, a sharp slap echoed through the air, silencing him. It was Manu, his stern expression making it clear that he had reached his limit with Shantanu's antics. In that moment, it seemed like this was the only way to bring Shantanu back to reality. Their surroundings fell quiet as Shantanu stood frozen in shock, his eyes locking with Manu's piercing gaze. The tension between them crackled in the air, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that had filled the room just moments before. As they drove home in silence, Manu could see tears streaming down his brother's face. He reached over to comfort him, but stopped when Shantanu suddenly lashed out in anger again. "Why do you always have to be better than me? Why do you always have to take care of everything and make all the decisions?" Shantanu shouted, his voice breaking. Shantanu's words poured out in a frustrated rush, his desire for freedom and independence clearly evident. He felt trapped and suffocated under the control of Manu, knowing that his upcoming move to London was just another way for Manu to maintain his power over him. Time seemed to slow as Manu finally understood the source of Shantanu's earlier frustration. It wasn't on his friend, but rather at himself. In his alcohol-induced state, Shantanu had unleashed a torrent of pent-up emotions, blaming Manu for hindering his growth as an independent and confident individual. As they stood on the cusp of a new chapter in their lives, Manu felt helpless and unsure of how to ease Shantanu's burden. This realization weighed heavy on Manu's heart. On the morning of their departure, Manu went and knocked on Shantanu's door one last time. When there was no response, he left a note for him, expressing how much he loved him and offering him the option to stay behind for some time before joining him when he felt ready. As Manu boarded the flight to London, he couldn't shake off the feeling of sadness that engulfed him. Despite everything that had happened between them, he wished things could have been different. Ever since that fateful day, Shantanu had shut himself off completely from Manu. Despite Manu's multiple attempts to reconcile and make amends, Shantanu remained adamant and impenetrable. Manu eventually accepted the loss and immersed himself in his professional life and family life, with his loving wife Vimala and their son. Manu emerged from his thoughts about past and sighed at the current situation. The car ride was an exercise in strained silence. The waiter sat rigidly, glancing out the window, lost in his own tumultuous thoughts. Occasionally he would murmur, "I don't know why this is happening to me," his words hanging in the air like a plea for understanding. Each repetition of the waiter's confusion only served to deepen the creases of worry lining Manu's forehead. Yet those words also echoed Manu's own sense of helplessness, a feeling he had not expected to share with a stranger who claimed to be his brother. As the miles stretched on, Manu's grip on the wheel relaxed incrementally, giving way to a resigned curiosity. "Talk to me, Shantanu," Manu finally said, breaking the silence, using the name not as an acknowledgement of belief, but as an anchor to the absurdity of his situation. "If there's even a sliver of truth to your story, then talk to me like my brother would." The waiter turned, the intensity of his gaze almost convincing. "I'm trying, Manu. I'm just as lost as you are." Lost. The word resonated with Manu, fitting too well into the void that had opened up over the past few days. Lost in a mythological enigma, lost in the corridors of a sterile hospital, lost in the company of a man who seemed both a stranger and kin. They arrived at the outskirts of the forest, where civilization gradually gave way to the wild. Manu parked the car along an unpaved track. The forest loomed ahead, a world untouched by modernity. As they stepped out, the scent of damp earth and foliage enveloped them, and Manu felt the weight of the unknown pressing down, urging him forward into the depths of the mystery that had torn his life asunder. The smell of wet leaves and soil filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile scent that clung to the hospital where his real brother lay. The waiter stammered and fumbled, making excuses that it was too dark to remember the exact trail. Manu's frustration grew as he demanded that he recall any clues from their previous visit just a few nights ago. After endless hours of searching and retracing their steps, they finally stumbled upon the elusive location, exhaustion and determination etched into their faces. "Over here," the waiter said, his voice subdued, almost reverent. Following the direction of his outstretched arm, Manu's gaze settled on what lay ahead, a sprawling convocation of trees that spiraled outward in an intricate labyrinthine design. It was unlike anything Manu had ever seen, despite his travels around the globe. Hundreds of trees, their trunks gnarled and intertwining as if they were part of a grand dance frozen in time, formed walls that wound into one another. Their branches arched overhead, creating a natural roof that filtered the sunlight into myriad hues of green and gold. The ground was carpeted with moss and ferns that added to the sense of otherworldliness. "Are you sure this is the place?" Manu asked, his scientific mind scrambling for explanations. Topiary art taken to an obsessive level, perhaps, or some natural phenomenon. "Positive," the waiter replied, though doubt flickered momentarily across his features. As they cautiously entered the maze, the foliage whispered softly against their clothes. The further they ventured, the outside world fell away, leaving only the enchanting rustle of leaves. Manu, torn between skepticism and a burgeoning sense of wonder, found himself captivated by the beauty and mystery that surrounded them. Amidst the labyrinth, they took precautions to avoid getting lost, strategically placing flags as markers to trace their path and ensure a way back through the mesmerizing twists and turns. "Keep your eyes open for anything unusual," Manu instructed, his voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the sanctity of the place. He noted the varying patterns on the bark, the way the light played tricks with shadows, each observation meticulously logged in his quest for answers. "Look at the symmetry," Manu murmured, more to himself than to his companion. He couldn't deny the deliberate nature of the maze, the way each tree seemed placed with precision. It was as if they were walking through the blueprint of a masterful architect, one whose canvas was the very earth itself. Time stretched on, and the forest seemed to hold its breath around them, awaiting a revelation. Manu's practical side knew there had to be an explanation, but a distant part of him, nurtured by the myths and legends narrated by his mother during his childhood, dared to believe in the mystical. As they delved further into the heart of the maze, Manu felt a subtle shift in the air, a vibrancy that tingled against his skin. Perhaps it was just the adrenaline or the charge of expectation, but something unseen seemed to beckon them onward, deeper into the tangle of woods. Manu ducked under a low-hanging branch, his gaze fixed upon the ground where roots wove patterns like ancient scripts. They had been walking for hours, the waiter leading the way with a confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Over here," the waiter called out, gesturing toward a particularly twisted tree whose trunk seemed to spiral upwards in defiance of gravity. Manu approached, running his fingers over the bark, feeling the grooves and knots under his touch. He searched for anything out of place, any sign or symbol that might indicate they were on the right path. But all he found was the natural, albeit peculiar, growth patterns of the forest denizens. "What exactly were you trying to achieve by coming here, buddy? All I see is hundreds of trees." "Yes, it's a weird and strange place, but I don't see anything beyond that," Manu said, his voice laced with a mix of skepticism and a faint trace of awe at the surreal beauty surrounding them. Manu shook his head slightly. He needed to stay grounded, to remember the stakes. That Shantanu lay in a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread, while they wandered through this fairy tale woodland. "Let's try this direction," the waiter suggested, pointing toward a narrow gap between two towering oaks. With a sigh born of frustration and fatigue, Manu nodded. What else was there to do but follow? The maze beckoned them deeper, and against his better judgment, Manu obliged, every footfall a silent plea for answers amidst the whispering leaves. "Over here!" the waiter called out, motioning towards an area where the trees thinned slightly, their branches less tangled, allowing a few stubborn rays of sunlight to penetrate the gloom. The waiter turned to face him, his expression etched with anxiety. "I don't know, Manu. I am desperate and frustrated, not knowing what is happening to me. This is the only unusual thing I can think of that happened in the last week." Manu exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on. He could see the genuine distress written across the waiter's features, and despite his skepticism, empathy flickered within him. "In that case, let us do it right," Manu said, his voice more resolute than he felt. "Let us retrace every single step that happened that day when you were here. What else did you do while you guys were here?" "Okay," the waiter murmured, nodding as if trying to convince himself as much as Manu. "Let's start from where we entered the maze." Together they retraced the route, the waiter recounting details as they went. The turn at the ancient oak, the clearing where they'd rested, the peculiar shape of a rock that had sparked a joke among his friends. "Here," the waiter finally spoke, his voice soft yet carrying through the woods. "We were all out of breath by this point. We found this massive tree." He gestured toward a banyan tree, its roots sprawling like the arms of a slumbering giant. "We sat down here just to catch our breath, you know." They approached the tree, its trunk wide enough to house stories within its bark. The two men settled down at its base, mirroring the actions taken days before. "Then what?" Manu prompted after a moment of rest, his eyes scanning their surroundings, half expecting some hidden mechanism or clue to reveal itself. Then Shantanu hesitated, rubbing his hands together as if to summon the memories. "It got colder as the night drew in. We needed warmth, so we started a campfire." "Right here?" Manu surveyed the area, finding a circle of stones that hinted at previous use. It seemed unremarkable, but the sense of ritual, of following the steps one by one, gave the action a strange weight. "Exactly here," confirmed the waiter, moving to reconstruct the fire ring with an automatic precision that bespoke truth rather than fabrication. They gathered twigs and dry leaves, the basic kindling for a flame that would ward off the chill of the forest night, just as it had before. As the small fire crackled to life, its warm glow pushing back against the encroaching shadows, Manu felt an odd comfort in its simplicity. It was a human act, a connection to countless ancestors who had huddled around fires for warmth and safety. Waiter broke the silence, his voice barely above the crackle of the flames. "We didn't bring enough food. After hours of wandering and playing around, we were starving." Manu leaned forward, the heat of the fire prickling his skin. "And then?" "Then we saw them," Shantanu motioned toward a cluster of trees not far from their position. "The fruits, they looked like guava, hanging there, ripe for the taking." Did all of your group eat the fruit? Manu's question cut through the night air, sharp with the need for clarity. Uh-huh, Shantanu nodded, his gaze locked on the flickering tongues of the fire. We all did. We were all very hungry. Manu strode over to the trees in question, examining the fruits that dangled innocuously from the branches. They were ordinary in appearance, yet now they seemed imbued with a significance he couldn't quite grasp. Let's try them, he said with a decisiveness that surprised even himself. If we're retracing steps, we can't leave this out. Together they picked the guava-like fruits, the action mundane but fraught with an undercurrent of anticipation. Manu turned the fruit in his hand, its texture and weight familiar yet foreign in this context. Was he truly about to cross a threshold where myth intertwined with reality? Or was this simply the desperate act of a man clinging to any thread of hope for his brother's recovery? All right, he murmured more to himself than to Waiter. Let's see where this takes us. Seemed normal enough, Manu muttered, examining it for any telltale sign that this fruit was more than it appeared to be. Should we? Shantanu asked tentatively, his eyes betraying a flicker of hope that perhaps recreating the events would lead to some revelation. It's our only lead, Manu responded with a reluctant nod, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily upon him. Here goes nothing, Manu said, and with a glance at Shantanu, who gave an encouraging nod, they bit into the flesh of the fruits. Shantanu, he said, his voice barely rising above the rustle of foliage. This is foolishness. There's nothing here. No sign, no symptom, nothing that correlates with your condition. He turned away from the tree, the fruit in his hand feeling increasingly like a harbinger of false hope. The waiter, wearing Shantanu's face, yet not quite him, stepped forward, the creases of desperation etched deeply on his brow. I understand your skepticism, Manu, he said, his voice steadier than his quivering hands. But can't we just finish revisiting everything from that day? We're already here. Even if you think logically, the doctor has already ruled out any possibility of my body coming out of the coma. I have no idea how to re-enter my body. What do we have to lose if we just spend a couple of more hours here retracing that night's steps? Manu opened his mouth to speak, to insist they leave immediately, but words lodged in his throat as he caught sight of the earnest plea in the waiter's eyes. It was a mirror to his own despair, a reflection of the unvoiced fears that skulked in the corners of his heart. Fine, he murmured almost to himself. They took few couple of more hours retracing remaining events from the fateful night. Nothing has changed, Manu finally conceded, his voice tinged with exhaustion. It's all exactly as it was, and yet we are no wiser for it, Manu finished, the resignation in his tone drawing a heavy veil over the day's endeavors. As the final rays of the sun surrendered to the encroaching night, the two men sat in a silence punctuated only by the crackling of the fire. My brother is on deathbed in hospital, and we are wasting our time here. Manu's voice broke the stillness like a stone shattering glass. The man's exhaustion was evident in his voice, as if he had reached the very end of his rope. His optimism has now faded into the dying embers of the campfire before them. They settled down beneath the largest tree nearby, its trunk so wide it seemed like the pillar of the world. The coarse bark pressed against Manu's back, but exhaustion soon eroded his discomfort, and he let his eyes drift shut. The world fell away in silence, save for the rustling whispers of the leaves. As Manu slipped into a shallow nap, memories of his brother danced behind his eyelids, flashes of Shantanu's laughter, the warmth of familial love, the pang of unspoken fears. After a brief nap, Manu woke up, feeling no more enlightened than before. Let's call it a day, Manu finally grumbled, the fruit's core tossed into the fire with a hiss. There's nothing here for us, just tales and false hopes. Yet as they prepared to leave, extinguishing the fire and trampling over the remnants of their makeshift camp, Manu couldn't shake the sense that they were missing something vital, an invisible thread waiting to be pulled that could unravel the entire tapestry of strangeness that had enveloped his life.